Hi everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you exactly what the best jobs are in Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. I wasn't comfortable making this video earlier, but now that Extreme Trials have been out and Savage Trials have opened up for a couple of days, I think there's now very clear information which really shows how the jobs are looking and how they're going to be looking for the next few months as well. So if you want to base your decision of what to play and focus on around what is the best right now, here's going to be some pretty clear answers. Of course, I will mention at the same time that for me personally, I would always value what is fun over what is the strongest. Of course, for a lot of people, those two overlap. You enjoy playing what is the strongest the most. So first of all, let's take a look at the DPS. This is, of course, not the only measure of what makes a job good, but it is an important measure of what makes a job good. And these are all the jobs. I'm slightly in the way, excuse me, of the healers down here. But across all the bosses on Savage difficulty, this is what it's looking like. And again, if you haven't looked at charts like this before, this is something called OR DPS, which is raid DPS, which is not only factoring in the damage that you do, but also the damage that you're helping the team do by giving them buffs or by putting debuffs on the boss. Okay? So that's what it's factoring in. It's like your total cumulative DPS contribution. So this is the thing that really matters. For the first boss here, we can see Reaper and Monk are at the front, the other melee DPS then a bit behind with Samurai, Dragoon, Ninja. In terms of the caster DPS, Black Mage is ahead, Red Mage a bit less, and Summoner a bit less. In fact, both of them a good chunk lower than the Black Mage. Bard is on top of the ranged, Machinist and Dancer. Dancer a good bit behind. And then for the tanks, we have Dark Knight and Gunbreaker in the front, Warrior a bit behind, and Paladin a good chunk behind them. And then for the healers, Sage in front, White Mage, Scholar, Astrologian also are the same. Sage doing a good chunk more, Astrologian a slight bit less. We flip over to boss number 2. Things are pretty much very similar. We have Monk and Reaper doing really well. Dragoon a bit ahead this time. Black Mage still in front. The tanks are pretty much the same. Dark Knight coming into the lead there. And the healers are pretty much the same as well. We go to boss 3. Interesting stuff has changed. And some interesting stuff is unchanged. Reaper and Monk at the top. Black Mage jumping up as well. And yeah, then in terms of the healers, we actually see that Scholar falls off quite a bit on this particular fight. Paladin, again, lagging behind on the tanks. Boss 4, part 1. We can see Samurai really struggling. They have some good pulls, some really bad pulls. Again, Dancer the weakest on the ranged. And yeah, again, a good mix in the healers once again. Same sort of deal for the final boss. So we have very few actual pulls, very few kills on this boss to see how things are doing. But yeah, again, Monk, Reaper, Samurai's doing pretty well, Black Mage, all the rest. When it comes to representation then amongst the jobs, this is also very interesting to see. So these are the compositions, the proportions that people are actually using. So for the first boss, actually for every single boss, there's 1 physical ranged, 1 magic ranged, 2 melee, 2 healers, one healy healer, 1 shield healer, and 2 tanks. That's across all these bosses. For the tanks on boss 1, Warrior's the most chosen, Paladin a good chunk lower. For the healers, White Mage and Sage the most chosen, the other 2 lower. Casters is actually dramatically in favor of Red Mage popularity. For ranged, Bard is dramatically in favor. And then for the melee, it's really Reaper by far the most chosen. Monk and Samurai there, and then Ninja and Dragoon lower. Boss 2, things flip a bit actually. You know, White Mage jumps up there, and Scholar jumps up as well. Warrior and Paladin actually coming in really strong in this boss. Machinist much more popular as well. And yeah, going over to the next boss then, we can see again, Red Mage really dominant over here. Scholar and Astrologian now popular. Sage really dropping off. Gunbreaker popular with Warrior. For melee DPS, it's pretty much the same story for ranged as well. And then for tanks on the final boss, again, Gunbreaker, Dark Knight here, Paladin low. Red Mage continues to dominate. Scholar and Astro for the hardest boss probably in the game. Reaper, Monk, and so on for the final phase as well for Hesperos Part 2. Similar stuff altogether. So when this all comes together, what are we looking at? This is how I would rank the jobs then. We'll go in order. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in A, B, or C to start off, and then I'm going to pick S tier, which for me is the best in slot, right? The best job for each particular role, because you do want to bring every role. What would be your go-to if you could only pick one? let's dive in. So, Dragoon, I think, is a B tier job. It's doing okay damage, but it's not at the top of the melee DPS charts at all. For me, Ninja is definitely the worst job in terms of the DPS, I think. Ninja is looking not too great on the damage. It's near the bottom of the melee DPS. It's not bringing things like, you know, the healing that Reaper brings, for example. Reaper brings some okay healing to the team. It's not bringing anything like that. So I think ninjas are just struggling a bit right now. Samurai, I think, is also B tier. I think Samurai is maybe slightly better than Dragoon, but they're pretty similar, to be honest. They're both doing similar amounts of damage. There's some fights where Samurai is better. There's other fights where Dragoon is better. I think the big thing with Samurai is that it seems to really struggle on some fights. They get very punished when their rotation and stuff is broken up. Next up, we have Reaper. Reaper's obviously going in the A tier. Reaper's really good damage from melee. Reaper and Monk. In fact, let's put Monk in here as well. Reaper and Monk, they're the two jobs that are doing the most damage for the melee DPS. Demonstrably across all these bosses, they just put out the most damage, and they have some decent buffs to help your team stay alive as well. With it's not Arcane Circle. That's the I can't remember the name of the buff, but it's in there. They both protect their team a little bit and do the most damage, so they're on top of the melee. For the ranged, I think Bard clearly is going up the top. They bring solid damage and really good buffs for your team as well. Machinist, I'm going to put in the B tier. I think Machinist is decent. They're good. They're solid. And then Dancer as well. Dancer brings less damage than Machinist, but they bring more group utility. I feel like Bard is kind of by far the most popular because it's bringing more damage than Dancer, but it's also, it's bringing the group utility of Dancer as well in some of those protective spells. So that's quite nice. For Black Mage, I'm going to put Black Mage in the B tier. Black Mage does much more damage than either Red Mage or Summoner. On some of those bosses, Black Mage is really pumping out the damage. So if you're looking for a casting range job that does the best damage, Black Mage is, on most, in some fights at least, without question, the best option. I do rank Summoner, therefore, a little bit lower than them. Summoner's still good. They're mobile, but their damage isn't as good as Black Mage. They do bring more utility, though, especially with reviving. And for me, I think that's what makes Red Mage definitely go up into the A tier as being the best choice for the magic DPS, the magic range DPS, is that they're bringing solid damage, not as good as Black Mage, but it's solid damage, it's good damage, and they're also bringing nice utility in terms of keeping their team alive, and in terms especially of being probably the best reviver in the game. They're not wasting their mana pool the way that healers do when they need to revive. And they can use dual cast to get those reses out. Sacrifices their damage to do it, but for progressing on tough fights, I think that's a very valuable thing, and they're just best in class for that. Spoiler for an S tier job. For me, Paladin is actually going to go, I'm going to put the tanks over here on the left, I think, actually. Paladin is going to go in the B tier for me. I think that they are definitely the weakest tank. There was one boss where they were popular, very popular, and then they're the least popular tank of the other bosses. I think the main reason is really that their damage output is just lower than the other tanks, and that damage output does matter, right? In Final Fantasy, you want damage from all of your jobs, but they're still a solid job, right? They're still in the B tier. They're still great for some bosses. They're just maybe not quite as good as the other tanks. Let's put Blue Mage, you can't take into any real proper difficult content. So let's put Blue Mage in the D tier. Sorry, Blue Mage. Warrior is going to go in the A tier. I think Warrior's a solid tank. They've got very good self-healing, and they do decent damage as well. And then we have the Dark Knight. Again, top damage, right? On some bosses doing really good damage and solid survivability. And same thing with Gunbreaker, sort of the top DPS of the tanks on some of those fights. Dark Knight sort of contending as well. Gunbreaker obviously lacking in any self-healing, but they have very strong just defensive cooldowns for mitigating damage as well. For the healers, honestly, as we saw, these healers are all sort of flipping. All of these healers can go into the A tier, I think, but it's really the question of the S tier. Where are we going with S tier? What are the best in-slot jobs? I think for the tanks, I would put Gunbreaker as the best tank overall. Just really solid survivability and yeah, just really good damage. I think they're slightly ahead. I think the tanks are all close, but I would say that definitely Gunbreaker best, followed by Dark Knight Warrior, somewhat equal. Maybe Dark Knight slightly ahead for Savage right now, and then Paladin slightly below. For the melee DPS, I'll give it to Reaper. But I think Monk is a close second. Monk's a very close second in terms of the melee DPS. I think these two stand head and shoulders above the rest. They do more damage and they do a bit more for your group. I think that Samurai and Dragoon are just a bit behind that for sure. And then Ninja is probably the worst of them all. For range DPS, Bard, I think definitely goes in the S tier there, bringing really good damage, good group support. And they are just ahead of the Dancer and the Machinist. I think Dancer and Machinist seem pretty even, to be honest. It sort of depends on the fight which one you would rather bring. Yeah, for magic ranged, it's obviously going to be the Red Mage. No real question right there. Best in slot, Red Mage, no question. Great damage and bringing good team support. Black Mage, I could almost move Black Mage up to A just because I feel like if you want more damage, Black Mage brings that. But it's kind of, I feel like it's a bit of a tough sell. I kind of prefer the utility of the Red Mage, I think. Well, I'll leave them in B, seeing as we've got such good damage coming out of like Reaper, Monk, and even Samurai Dragoon in some of these fights now. And then for the healers, that's quite a difficult one. I'm going to slightly give it to Scholar, actually, believe it or not. And in terms of these, I think maybe Astrologian's slightly better than White Mage. It doesn't want to swap them. But it's pretty similar, honestly. Yeah, it's kind of a tough call, but I do think that Scholar kind of takes the crown. It takes the cake. It seems to be the go-to for the most difficult stuff in the game. Yeah, we were all hating on Scholar coming up to the launch of the game, but I do think that they do sort of pull ahead, it seems, in terms of healer popularity, which speaks volumes. They just have great utility for the team. So yeah, Scholar. And there we go. I think this looks pretty good in terms of this stuff. Yeah, honestly, I'm just saying, do I want to move anything within the tiers? I think it's fine. Yeah, no, I think this actually looks pretty okay. Kind of mixing the roles in here a bit, but that sort of fits, right? That sort of fits. So, for example, in B tier, I wouldn't say that this is a strict ordering. It's more like take the roles, like the melee versus the range versus the casters, and versus the tank in any sort of order. I'd put tank ahead. I think that Paladin is probably the best of these by small margin, but you could sort of mix these two sets, these three sets of two around as you wish, and it would still be okay. It's more like the ordering within the sets is how I would probably order it. There you go. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? This is what I think are the best, looking at the stats, looking at the figures, looking at what is working for the best players in the game, in the hardest content of Endwalker so far. There you go. Thank you for watching, everyone. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.